Thank you for this opportunity. This is a story that I presented to the Taipei Film Commission, and they've decided that this will be their first international joint venture with an American film production company. So they have tasked me to go to Hollywood and to talk to different film production companies about forming a joint venture investment project with the Taiwan government over this movie. It's called If David Can, So Can You. The log line is in 1990 in Taipei, a 23-year-old proud to be Taiwanese intern and a 50-year-old former American radio legend combined their talents to save Taiwan's English language radio station. The genre, it's a quirky biopic. Both of these people really existed, David Wong and Lan Roberts. It's a cross-cultural, cross-generational relationship, and it talks about how Lan is training David to be a radio pro so that he can work at any radio station in the world, while David is healing Lan's, well, he's given up on himself. He believes, because of failed marriages, which I'll go into in a few minutes, that he's only worthwhile on the air and behind the mic. So David is healing Lan to get out from behind the mic and go out and embrace life again. This happens in 1990, pre-internet, before the internet overcame radio as a media. So in Taiwan at this time, there were only 3 radio stations, 2 Chinese radio stations, and this former Armed Forces radio network station that now has flipped to a civilian station, and arguably had the largest English language radio audience in the world, at least 6 times larger than the radio station portrayed in Good Morning Vietnam. And I think a lot of Americans would say, why didn't we know this story? No, because Robin Williams made that radio station in Vietnam famous. I'm going to break down the story using a 4-act structure. The opening credits are interviews with real Taiwanese citizens, and they're summarizing the relationship between America and Taiwan and American culture that began in 1954 with President Eisenhower, and then with this Armed Forces radio station came in during the Vietnam War, and it had uncensored news when Taiwan was in martial law, so lots of people were listening to it. And then Casey Kasem's American Top 40, people just embraced that show and they loved it. It had possibly 5 million. I say possibly because the ratings at that time weren't as sophisticated as they are now, but we were estimating 5 million listeners every Sunday, Taiwanese listeners, to American Top 40. Also to know in the background is that English language taught in Taiwan at this time relied on grammar, not speaking out. And David Wong was a person who rejected grammar. His thing was just talk out, make mistakes. The foreigners will understand you and they'll correct you, and that's how your English will get better. Act 1, we're 23-year-old David Wong in his family home doing voice exercises, listening to his mentor, Lan Roberts, on the radio, and David's imitating Lan, trying to sound like him. His mother comes in and tells him that this is going to be your last day. You've got to quit being a free intern and go work somewhere for a salary. And she nags him. That's going to be a theme throughout this movie, is nagging to get your way. Then on the street, we see that David is a rebel. He's got shoulder-length hair and a t-shirt that says proud to be Taiwanese on it, while other guys his age are wearing white shirts, black ties, and going to the office, going to a factory. David is different from the normal Taiwanese. You also have a student that's eating breakfast, and when Lan says his phrase of the day, that student stands up and copies it, and all of his other classmates in that breakfast shop applaud him. So speaking out in English was accepted in Taiwan. There's also a Judy subplot. Judy is a Taiwanese listener who has been calling Lan for, regularly, and Lan, because he's had 3 divorces, he's given up on ever meeting a woman again because he doesn't want to see the disappointment, so he keeps rejecting Judy. Well, David decides that this is going to be the day that he starts talking to Judy in Taiwanese and telling her that Lan does want to meet her. And so while Lan is teaching David radio, David is healing Lan's insecurity. Act 2, we go back and forth between the GM of the radio station planning the last day of programming. It's his responsibility to sell or to renew Coca-Cola. The contract with Coca-Cola ends at 8 o'clock, but he's a slogan guy. He's really just been a GM who's gotten by creating slogans, and everybody's given up confidence because it's just not his field of expertise. At the same time, you're switching back to Land mentoring David and getting him ready step by step by doing some recordings in English before he actually goes on solo. Because Land says, you know, kid, they're waiting for you to mess up. They're waiting to say that's the guy who's not perfect. He goes, when you go on, we can't give them any excuses not to like you. Enter Trevor. Trevor is the Caucasian Australian Coke manager who he's just convinced that he's right. He thinks that all a radio station has to do is translate the slogan. Again, we're going to go with slogans as a theme in a theme of this movie. The slogan of Coke, it's the real thing, into Mandarin, and that's going to convince Taiwanese to drink Coke. Well, while he's there, he's listening to Land mentor David, and when he doesn't get something right, he's got to do it again. And he's very impressed, and he sees an opportunity. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll renew the contract if David will agree to be the voice of David's Grammar Point, sponsored by Coke. Well, unfortunately, that's absolutely what David is against, and his youthful pride makes him say, no, why don't you just have me read from a dictionary? He insults Trevor. He's young, he's brash. That's what David's got to learn throughout this movie, is to become more mature and more of a professional. Well, Trevor gets insulted and he says, I'll just go to the other radio station with Coke's Grammar Point. The GM says, you know, you're a slogan guy. I'm a slogan guy. Here's the slogan that is going to attract millions of Taiwanese students to this radio station because of David. And Trevor says, I'm not so sure about that. He grabs the slogan without looking at it and puts it in his pocket. Well, the emotional part of the movie is David finally does go solo. And once he goes solo, because there's only 2 other radio stations, the word spreads. David's mom gets phone call after phone call saying he's on the air, he's speaking English. She understands why it was so important for him to work at this radio station. David decides that he's going to solve the problem that he caused by rejecting Coke by calling Casey Kasem's production studio and asking Casey to come on that very day to do a live studio. Well, at first they say no, but then David nags them. He uses that ability that his mom had. He nags them into saying yes, and a Casey interview is set, and David's going to do it that night. The finale is that Land does agree to go meet Judy. In fact, he's excited about it. David's won that point. And the finale, the last scene, is David's meeting with Hit Radio didn't go well. He comes to a restaurant, sits down where David's interview with Casey Kasem is being played. Everybody in the restaurant's listening to it. Mothers are pointing up at the radio. Even though he doesn't speak the language, he gets what's going on. People are proud that this kid is speaking English. He wads up his Grammar Point sponsored by Coke proposal, takes out the slogan given to him by the GM, and it says, if David can do it, so can you. He gets it, why David will be the selling point and get kids to drink Coca-Cola. Very last scene, we're in a bowling alley. Bowling alley is full, but it's quiet. Why? Because the bowlers with bowling ball in hand are listening to David do the radio, Land included. Land turns to Judy and smiles and says, hey, you hear that radio smile? That's something that Land had been insisting that David do throughout, is have a radio smile. David has it. That's the end. I'm passionate about this story because I worked at this radio station in the 1990s with both Land Roberts and David Wong, and I know that they had very clashing personalities, but put them together into a film, it would be an entertaining story. Thank you.